Keeping exotic animals is something I've always been passionate about since I was a child, and it's a hobby shared with millions of people around the world. However, there is a darker side to the industry.
What experience do you have with wild-caught reptiles?
Not masses. I used to work in a reptile shop, so there'd be wild-caught reptiles that come in through there. But we always try to keep away from them as much as we can. But you can't really when you're inside a pet shop. A lot of the stuff that comes up on the list will be wild-caught.
What is it you know about wild-caught animals?
Normally you're legally allowed to take a certain number of adults and not normally allowed to take juveniles because they're not old enough to breed yet, which means they can't contribute to their species. But a lot of people go about it the wrong way, or they'll buy from dealers, which basically catch as many babies as possible because they're the easiest to catch.
I can just go through the definitions of captive farm, wild caught.
So wild caught, just caught from the wild. So it is not always the most sustainable thing. People go out and they just gather things. I won't say willy-nilly because some companies do it really, really well, but some people do just take far too much from the wild.
There's captive hatch. So that's when poachers or people that are going into the illegal pet trade collect hatches of eggs from the wild, and then they'll raise them and hatch them themselves.
Obviously you have wild farms, which can sometimes be a little bit better. But in my experience, really, captive bred is the only way to go.
I decided to investigate the UK's largest wholesaler of reptiles, as I have a lot of experience with them. So as an example, I got a hold of a retailer login so that I could see just how honest they're being. One of the first things you see on their site claims that most of their animals are captive bred. After just a few pages, it is clear to see that there is some dishonesty in their claim. While searching around, I found that 62% of their invertebrates happen to be captive bred, but then only 50% of their amphibians were captive bred. And even worse than that, only 31% of their lizard species were captive bred. So I decided to give them a call and question them on a couple of things.
Hi there, welcome to... How may I help you?
Hi there. I was wondering if I could ask you some questions about your wild-caught policies.
Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to comment. But if you hold for a minute, I can get you in contact with the supervisor.
Okay. I'm making a documentary about wild-caught reptiles, and I just kind of wanted to speak a little about your wild-caught policies.
Okay.
So I was looking on your about page, and one of the first things it says is that most of your reptiles are captive bred. But then I got a hold of a retailer login and went through and tallied up and found out that actually most of them are wild caught.
Well, our stock list is updated on a monthly basis, so the ratio of wild caught to captive bred species does vary. However, during collection, holding and transport, the animals are treated really well, housed correctly, fed appropriately. We only use suppliers that we believe to be reputable and maintain our own high standards.
Okay.
Which retailer did you say that you're representing to get this information?
I was also wondering if you could tell me a little bit about where you source your wild caught animals, and how much you would pay for, say, like a green anole or something that was wild caught.
I'm sorry, sir, but we can't disclose that information.
The way in which these animals are taken from the wild comes down to the indigenous people being exploited into destroying their own ecosystems for less than minimum wage. The companies exploiting them, however, know the consequences of their actions. Wild-caught animals that ship to the UK face some of the worst conditions imaginable. 30% of specimens die during transport, and then 90% of all wild-caught animals sold through pet shops will die within a year due to stress and lack of care. Wildlife trafficking is estimated to be a $19 billion per year global business, surpassed only by the black market sales and trafficking of drugs, humans, and firearms. The reason that this is all legal is down to a law that came about in 2017. This law states that it is illegal to sell any protected animal, unless, of course, they were caught outside of the UK or EU. Australia has a completely different set of rules when it comes to captive wildlife.
G'day guys, I'm Tristan from Australia, currently living in the Northern Territory, and I've been in the zookeeping industry now for around about 6.5 years. With Australia, it's pretty tight, so we don't export a lot and import a lot. We obviously you've got like CITES, which is like an international sort of board of an organisation sort of regulates that kind of industry. And in Australia, we have a policy called the Environmental Protection and Biosecurity Conservation Act, and basically that's us enforcing or pretty much making sure we meet the standards of CITES to export and import animals. For an example, with like sugar gliders, there's more sugar gliders overseas than there is in the wild in Australia because of the pet trade. There's not an emphasis of worrying about protecting them because there's such a big population overseas. But in saying that, you can't go and just collect out of the wild. It has to be through zoos, or it has to be through other areas than that. And then only certain states allow you to have wildlife as pets. Anything else other than that would be illegally caught. So benefit to sort of getting these animals, if the situation or the state allows it, you can introduce them into parks to refresh bloodlines, keep genetics healthy, and make sure you don't get genetic bottlenecks and inbreeding and stuff like that. So that's definitely a benefit for species. I really hope that, in the future, it can sort of become more streamlined. Species can be easily accessible for the correct institutions to breed for conservation.